I always thought Monday morning meetings were predictable affairs. You know the kind: stale coffee, sleepy colleagues, and the usual rundown of weekly goals that everyone promptly forgets by Tuesday. That's how it had been for my 5 years at Vantage Partners, until today. My name is Natalie Harper. I'm 34. And until approximately 47 minutes ago, I was the senior project manager for our most valuable client account at Vantage, a strategic marketing firm headquartered in Denver, where the mountains stand guard over glass office buildings filled with people like me, ambitious, dedicated, and perhaps a bit too trusting. The conference room on the 12th floor has always been my favorite. Floor-to-ceiling windows frame the Rockies like a postcard, and something about that view makes even the most tedious meetings bearable. But when I walked in this morning, the blinds were drawn. The room felt smaller, airless. Megan Sawyer, my direct supervisor, sat with perfect posture in the chair across from mine. Beside her was Clara Hill from Human Resources, a manila folder thick with papers positioned precisely between her manicured hands. "Please, sit down, Natalie," Megan said, her voice carrying that artificial pleasantness I'd come to recognize as her professional mask. I'd seen her wear it countless times with difficult clients. I never thought I'd be on the receiving end. "Is everything okay?" I asked, already sensing that nothing was. Clara cleared her throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the hushed room. "We've called this meeting to discuss some serious concerns regarding your conduct with the Rainier Tech account." My stomach dropped. Rainier Tech was our biggest client, a rising star in cloud computing solutions that had nearly tripled its marketing budget with us over the past year. My year, to be exact. I had been the one nurturing that relationship, developing their campaign strategy, and watching their metrics climb month after month. "What concerns?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Megan slid a document across the table. "Effective immediately. You're being suspended without pay for overstepping your authority with Rainier Tech." The words hit like physical blows. Suspended, without pay, overstepping authority. "This isn't possible," I said, scanning the document in disbelief. "There must be some mistake." "No mistake," Clara said, her tone clipped and professional. "We have sufficient evidence of inappropriate conduct." "What evidence? What inappropriate conduct?" I demanded, my voice rising despite my efforts to remain calm. Megan's face remained impassive. "You've been cultivating a relationship with Graham Whitaker that exceeds your professional boundaries. You've made promises and commitments to Rainier Tech that you have no authority to make." Graham Whitaker, the CEO of Rainier Tech, the man who had personally called me 3 times in the past week to discuss expanding their campaign into international markets, the client who had specifically requested me on every call, every meeting, every presentation. "That's absurd," I said. "Everything I've done has been to benefit this company and serve our client. Graham, Mr. Whitaker, has been pleased with our work." "Too pleased with your work." "Apparently," Megan said, something cold flickering in her eyes. "During your suspension, you are explicitly forbidden from contacting anyone at Rainier Tech. This includes Graham Whitaker. Any violation will result in immediate termination." Clara pushed another document toward me. "This outlines the terms of your suspension. It will last for a minimum of 2 weeks while we conduct a full investigation. Your email access and security credentials have already been temporarily deactivated." Already deactivated. They had planned this before I even walked into the room. The realization made me feel physically ill. "You'll need to gather your personal belongings and leave the premises by noon." Clara continued. "A security escort will be provided." A security escort, like I was some kind of criminal. 5 years of late nights, weekend work, and successful campaigns. And this was how they treated me. "Do I have any right to appeal this decision?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice level. "The process is outlined in the documentation," Clara replied mechanically. "You may submit a written response within 5 business days." I looked from Clara to Megan, searching for any hint of the mentorship and collegial respect I thought we had built over the years. There was nothing there but cool professionalism and, from Megan, something else I couldn't quite identify. Satisfaction? Relief? Is there anything else you'd like to add? Clara asked. Pen poised over her notepad. There were 1,000 things I wanted to say. That this was wrong. That they were making a terrible mistake. That Rainier Tech would notice my absence immediately. Instead, I stood up, gathered the paperwork, and said simply, "No. I think you've made everything perfectly clear." The drive home from Vantage Partners felt surreal. Denver's familiar streets seemed suddenly foreign, as if I were seeing them through someone else's eyes. My apartment building, a renovated warehouse in Lodo that had seemed so trendy and perfect when I signed the lease, now loomed like an unfriendly fortress. Inside my apartment, I dropped my bag and the ominous folder of suspension paperwork on the kitchen counter and sank onto my couch. The silence was deafening. No email notifications, no client calls. Nothing but the gentle hum of my refrigerator and the muffled sounds of the city 12 floors below. I should have been crying, or raging, or at least Googling employment lawyers. Instead, I felt numb, my brain unable to process the swift and dramatic shift in my professional life. Just last Friday, I had led a presentation that had the entire Rainier Tech executive team applauding. Graham had even suggested we meet for dinner the following week to discuss exciting new possibilities. The dinner, it hit me suddenly. 2 weeks ago, Graham had invited me to dinner at Guard and Grace, one of Denver's most exclusive steakhouses. I had hesitated, aware of the optics, but he had insisted it was strictly business. "Bring your colleague if you want," he had said. "But honestly, Natalie, you're the one who gets our vision. You're the one I trust with Rainier's future." I hadn't brought a colleague. I hadn't thought it necessary. We had discussed marketing strategies over perfectly cooked filet mignon and a bottle of Cabernet that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Graham had been effusive in his praise of my work and, as the evening progressed, increasingly candid about his frustrations with Vantage's upper management, specifically with Megan. "She's competent," he had said, swirling the last of his wine. "But she doesn't have your insight or creativity. I've been thinking it might be time for you to take the lead on our account." I had demurred, explaining that Megan was the relationship manager and I was just the project lead. Graham had waved away my explanation. "Titles are just words on business cards," he'd said. "I'm more interested in results, and you deliver those. I'm going to speak with your CEO about restructuring the account team." Had Megan found out about that conversation? Was this suspension a preemptive strike to protect her position? The more I thought about it, the more certain I became that this wasn't about professional boundaries at all. This was about power and control. With a renewed sense of purpose, I opened the suspension folder and began to read. The allegations were vague and maddeningly nonspecific. Inappropriate level of familiarity with client, unauthorized promises, undermining established management protocols. Not a single concrete example was provided. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Rio Grande, 7 p.m. Back booth. Delete this message. J. Julia Parks." We had started at Vantage together 5 years ago, but she had moved to the creative department 2 years back. We weren't close friends, but we had always respected each other's work. And now she was reaching out through an unknown number, suggesting a clandestine meeting. Something was definitely wrong. The Rio Grande was a Tex-Mex restaurant known more for its lethal margaritas than its discreet meeting spaces. But its location, just far enough from Vantage's offices to avoid running into colleagues, made it a smart choice. I arrived early, ordered water instead of a margarita, and waited. Julia arrived at 7:05, accompanied by Derek Long from the analytics team. They slid into the booth across from me, both looking nervously over their shoulders. "We can't stay long," Julia said without preamble. "But we thought you should know what's happening." "It's bad, Nat," Derek added, his usually cheerful face somber. "Megan's on a rampage." "What exactly's going on?" I asked. Julia leaned forward. "Graham Whitaker called Eric Callahan directly last Wednesday. Apparently, he specifically requested that you be promoted to lead the Rainier account. Eric Callahan was Vantage's CEO. a man I had spoken to maybe 3 times in my entire tenure at the company. Eric mentioned it to Megan during their weekly check-in. Derek continued. According to Samantha from his assistant pool, Megan looked like she'd been slapped. The next thing we know, Julia said, Megan's in Clara's office for hours on Thursday. Then on Friday, they're pulling your performance reviews, email records, everything. They can't find anything legitimate, I said. I've been nothing but professional. That's not stopping them from creating a narrative, Derek replied grimly. Megan's telling everyone you've been making inappropriate overtures to Graham, promising him special treatment. That's ridiculous, I said, my voice rising enough that a nearby table glanced our way. I lowered my tone. Every interaction I've had with Graham has been strictly professional. We know, Julia said. But Megan's scared. She knows she's about to lose Rainier Tech, her biggest success story, to you. And Clara's helping her because they go way back. They were sorority sisters at CU Boulder. The pieces were falling into place. So this suspension is a stall tactic. Derek finished. They're trying to isolate you from Graham long enough to either discredit you or convince him to keep working with Megan. But that's going to backfire spectacularly. I said, Graham specifically doesn't want to work with Megan anymore. He told me she doesn't understand their vision. Which is exactly why she's so desperate. Julia said, Rainier Tech accounts for almost 40% of her portfolio. If she loses them, her position is in jeopardy. We should get going, Derek said, glancing at his watch. But we wanted you to know you're not alone. A lot of us think this is wrong. One more thing, Julia added, sliding a flash drive across the table. Some email exchanges you might find interesting. Megan's not as careful with her communications as she should be. They left as quickly as they had arrived, leaving me with a half-eaten basket of chips, an untouched water, and a small flash drive that suddenly felt very heavy in my palm. Back in my apartment, I plugged the flash drive into my personal laptop. It contained a folder of email exchanges, mostly between Megan and Clara, spanning the past week. The most recent, from just yesterday, made my blood run cold. From Megan Sawyer to Clara Hill. Subject, Re and H situation. Clara. The suspension needs to happen before Graham has a chance to formalize his request. If Natalie is officially removed from client contact, we can control the narrative. I've already started rebuilding the relationship with Graham. He just needs to see that I understand Rainier's needs just as well as she does. Once she's been out of the picture for a couple of weeks, this will all blow over. Thanks for having my back on this. Mess. There it was in black and white. My suspension had nothing to do with my conduct and everything to do with Megan's desperation to keep her most valuable client. I felt a surge of anger, followed quickly by determination. I wouldn't let them destroy my reputation and career without a fight. I spent the rest of the evening reviewing Vantage's employee handbook, focusing on the sections about disciplinary procedures and appeals. According to company policy, I had the right to submit a formal appeal to both the legal department and the executive team. I would need evidence to support my case, evidence that Megan's accusations were fabricated and motivated by self-interest rather than genuine concern for company protocol. I began compiling a dossier, performance reviews, showing consistent excellence, email exchanges with Graham that demonstrated entirely appropriate professional communication, meeting notes, campaign results that highlighted my contributions to the Rainier Tech account. I even had a handwritten thank you note from Graham after a particularly successful product launch, praising my exceptional insight and dedication. By midnight, I had drafted a comprehensive appeal document, carefully laying out the timeline of events, the lack of specific allegations, and the evidence suggesting Megan's true motivations. I included Julia and Derek as potential witnesses. Though I knew that might put their jobs at risk, I would ask them before submitting the final version. As I was about to close my laptop, an email notification appeared. Despite Vantage deactivating my work email, they couldn't touch my personal account, the one that Graham had contacted me on occasionally for urgent matters, with Megan's full knowledge and approval. The email was from Graham himself, sent just minutes ago. From Graham Whitaker. 2. Natalie Harper. Subject, where are you? Natalie, I tried reaching you through your Vantage email and got an automated response saying you're currently unavailable. I've left 3 messages with Megan today, but she's being evasive about your absence. Is everything all right? We have the Asia Pacific expansion meeting tomorrow, and frankly, I need you there. You're the only one who fully grasps what we're trying to accomplish with this initiative. Please call me on my personal line as soon as you get this. Regards, Graham. My heart raced. Graham had noticed my absence immediately. Just as I had predicted, Megan was already failing to maintain the relationship. But I couldn't respond, not without violating the terms of my suspension and risking termination. I saved the email as further evidence and closed my laptop, my mind churning with possibilities and strategies. The next day, I finalized my appeal document and emailed it to both Vincent Torres in the legal department and CEO Eric Callahan. I also printed copies and sent them via certified mail to ensure they couldn't claim they never received them. Then I waited. The waiting was excruciating. I cleaned my apartment from top to bottom. I caught up on books I'd been meaning to read. I even took a day trip to Boulder, hiking the Flatirons and trying to clear my head. But every time my phone buzzed, I jumped, hoping for news. On day 4 of my suspension, Julia texted from her unknown number again. Chaos at the office. M bungled the Rainier quarterly review. GW walked out mid-presentation. I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Vindication that Megan was struggling without me. Concern for the account I had worked so hard to build. And yes, a small, petty satisfaction that Graham was discovering firsthand what I had known all along. Megan was a skilled manager, but lacked the creative vision and detailed understanding that Rainier Tech needed. The next day, Derek called from what was clearly the stairwell at Vantage, his voice echoing slightly. Graham Whitaker is on the warpath, he said without greeting. He cornered Amanda from our team and demanded to know where you were. When she told him you were on temporary leave, he looked like he was going to explode. What did Megan tell him? I asked. That's the thing. She's been so vague that he's getting suspicious. He directly asked if you'd been fired, and Megan stammered something about personnel adjustments. It was painful to watch. Has anyone from legal or the executive team mentioned my appeal? Not publicly, Derek said. But Vince from legal has been in meetings with Eric all afternoon, and Clara looks like she hasn't slept in days. After we hung up, I checked my email again. Still nothing official from Vantage. But there was another message from Graham. From Graham Whitaker. To Natalie Harper. Subject, this is unacceptable. Natalie, after a disastrous meeting with Megan today, I demanded straight answers about your absence. She finally admitted you've been placed on some sort of administrative leave, though she refused to provide details. I want you to know that I've made my position clear to Vantage. Either you return to manage our account, or Rainier Tech will be taking our business elsewhere. I've already instructed our legal team to review our contract for exit clauses. Whatever is happening, I hope you're all right. You've been an exceptional partner to Rainier, and I won't stand by while you're sidelined for reasons no one seems willing to articulate. Regards, Graham. I saved this email with the others, feeling a surge of gratitude toward Graham. His support might just be the leverage I needed. On the morning of the 6th day of my suspension, my doorbell rang. A courier handed me a thick envelope bearing Vantage's logo. Inside was a letter from Eric Callahan himself. Dear Ms. Harper, your appeal regarding your recent suspension has been received and reviewed with the utmost attention. Based on the evidence you've provided and additional information that has come to light, I am requesting your presence at a formal review meeting tomorrow, May 12th, at 10:00 a.m. in the Executive Conference Room. Please be prepared to discuss the matters outlined in your appeal. You may bring legal representation if you wish, though this is not required at this stage. Sincerely, Eric Callahan, Chief Executive Officer, Vantage Partners. Additional information that had come to light? What could that mean? Had Graham made good on his threat? Had someone else come forward with evidence supporting my case? I spent the rest of the day preparing for the meeting, reviewing my evidence once more and rehearsing what I would say. I chose my outfit carefully. A charcoal gray suit that projected confidence without aggression. I printed fresh copies of all my documentation, organizing it in a leather portfolio. When I arrived at Vantage the next morning, the security guard who had once escorted me out now nodded respectfully and handed me a temporary access badge. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt interminable. The executive conference room was nothing like the one where I'd been suspended. This space occupied the corner of the building, with views of both downtown Denver and the mountains beyond. The table was solid walnut, large enough to seat 20, though today only 6 chairs were positioned around one end. Eric Callahan sat at the head of the table, his silver hair and tailored suit giving him the air of authority he had cultivated over decades in the industry. To his right was Vincent Torres from Legal, his expression unreadable behind wire-rimmed glasses. To Eric's left sat Diane Meyer, the chief operating officer, a woman I had always admired for her no-nonsense approach to management. Across from them, Megan and Clara occupied 2 chairs, both looking significantly less composed than when they had delivered news of my suspension. Megan's usual perfect posture had given way to a slight hunch, and Clara kept adjusting and readjusting the folders in front of her. The 6th chair, directly across from Eric, was obviously meant for me. "Mind Harper, thank you for joining us," Eric said as I took my seat. "I understand the past week has been difficult, and I appreciate your cooperation as we work to resolve this situation." I nodded but remained silent, waiting to see how this would unfold. "I've reviewed your appeal thoroughly," Eric continued, "as well as the original suspension documentation. I've also spoken directly with Graham Whitaker at Rainier Tech." He paused, his gaze moving from me to Megan. "It seems there are significant discrepancies between the accounts of what transpired." Megan shifted in her seat. "Sir, as I explained in my report, Natalie crossed professional boundaries with Graham Whitaker, making promises about account management that she had no authority to make." "That's simply not true," I said, opening my portfolio. "Every communication I had with Graham was appropriate and within my role as project manager. I never promised him anything without proper authorization." "You had dinner with him alone," Clara interjected. "That's hardly standard protocol for client management." "A dinner that Megan was aware of and approved," I countered, pulling out an email exchange. "As you can see here, I specifically mentioned the dinner invitation to Megan, and she responded with, and I quote, 'Great opportunity to strengthen the relationship. Keep me posted on any new initiatives he mentions.'" Vincent Torres accepted the document, examining it carefully before passing it to Eric. "Furthermore," I continued, "I have multiple examples of Megan encouraging me to cultivate a closer professional relationship with Graham, specifically because he responded well to my communication style." I presented a series of emails spanning the past year, each showing Megan explicitly directing me to take the lead on various aspects of the Rainier Tech account. "What Ms. Sawyer neglected to mention in her allegations," I said, keeping my voice steady, "is that Graham recently expressed interest in having me, not Megan, lead the Rainier Tech account moving forward. This suspension conveniently occurred immediately after that conversation." "That's speculation," Megan said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Actually, it's not," Eric said, his tone suddenly cooler. "Graham was quite explicit about the timing in our conversation yesterday. He also provided copies of his recent communications with you, Megan, which he described as increasingly frustrating and evasive." Megan paled visibly. "I've been doing my best to maintain the relationship during this transition period." "A transition period that you engineered through false allegations," I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "I have evidence that this suspension was a deliberate attempt to remove me from the Rainier Tech account before Graham could formalize his request for me to lead it." I produced the email Julia had provided, the one where Megan explicitly stated her plan to Clara. Vincent Torres read it, his eyebrows rising slightly before he passed it to Eric. Clara spoke up, her voice strained. "That email lacks context. We were concerned about Natalie's professional conduct and—" "Clara," Eric interrupted, "I think we've seen enough to understand the context quite clearly." He turned to Diane Meyer. "Your thoughts?" Diane, who had been silent until now, straightened in her chair. Based on the evidence presented and our conversation with Graham Whitaker, it appears Ms. Harper has been subjected to an unjustified disciplinary action. More concerning is the apparent motivation behind it. She looked directly at Megan and Clara. This represents a serious breach of our company's values and ethics. The room fell silent. I could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning, the distant sound of traffic below. "Here's what's going to happen," Eric finally said, his voice carrying the weight of decisive authority. "Natalie, your suspension is lifted, effective immediately. You will receive full back pay for the days you were suspended. Additionally, as Graham Whitaker has specifically requested, you will now serve as the lead manager for the Rainier Tech account." Megan made a small, choked sound but said nothing. "Megan," Eric continued, "you will transition to our market research division, effective next week. We value your analytical skills, but your judgment in this matter has been questionable at best." He turned to Clara. "As for you, Clara, your position requires trust and integrity. I'll be meeting with the board this afternoon to discuss appropriate next steps for the HR department." Clara's face had gone ashen. She closed her folder with trembling hands. "One final matter," Eric said. "Vincent will be drafting a new protocol for disciplinary actions to ensure nothing like this happens again. All suspensions will require review by legal before implementation." He looked at me. "If you don't object, we'd like to call it the Harper Protocol." I felt a rush of vindication so powerful it momentarily took my breath away. "I would be honored," I managed to say. "Good." Eric nodded. "Diane will work with you to ensure a smooth transition with Rainier Tech. I suggest you call Graham immediately after this meeting. He's been quite concerned." As the meeting concluded and we filed out of the conference room, Megan attempted to approach me. "Natalie, Not now," I said quietly. "Perhaps not ever." She stopped, something like shame finally crossing her features before turning and walking away. The next few days were a whirlwind. My return to Vantage was met with quiet support from colleagues who had heard rumors but not the full story. Julia and Derek greeted me with knowing smiles, and I made sure Eric knew about their help during my suspension. My first call with Graham after my reinstatement lasted nearly 2 hours as we caught up on everything that had happened in my absence and planned for the future of the Rainier Tech account. His relief at my return was palpable. "I was ready to walk," he admitted. "The work you've done for us has been transformative. I wasn't about to let internal politics at Vantage derail that progress." "I appreciate your support," I told him. It made all the difference. "Well, now we can get back to business," he said. "I want to discuss expanding our campaign into the Canadian market. I think there's significant opportunity there, and I trust you to lead the strategy." As promised, Clara Hill resigned the following week. The official announcement cited personal reasons, but everyone knew the truth. Megan moved to market research with minimal fanfare. Her office relocated to a different floor where our paths rarely crossed. 3 months later, I was promoted to Director of Strategic Accounts, with Rainier Tech as the centerpiece of my portfolio. Graham signed a 3-year contract extension, increasing their marketing budget by another 20%. On the 1-year anniversary of my suspension, I stood at the window of my new corner office, looking out at the mountains that had been my only solace during those uncertain days. My team was growing, our clients were thriving, and the Harper Protocol had already prevented 2 hasty disciplinary actions in other departments. Sometimes justice isn't just about reclaiming your seat at the table, it's about ensuring no one else falls into the same dirty trap of power. As I turned back to my desk, where a stack of new proposals awaited my review, I couldn't help but smile. The view from here wasn't just beautiful, it was earned, and that made all the difference.